It all started the day my dad passed away. At first, everything felt like a blur, as though I were stuck in a fog. Grief hit hard, but what truly broke me wasn't just the loss of him. It was what came after, when my stepmom, the woman who had been a part of our family for nearly 10 years, showed her true colors. My dad's death was unexpected, and the fact that it was sudden made everything worse. One day, we were talking about his health, and the next, he was gone, leaving a massive hole in my life. And like everyone else, I thought I'd have time to grieve. But what I didn't expect was that just days after his funeral, my stepmom started making moves that felt less like mourning and more like she was planning something. She wasn't exactly warm to me before his passing, but I never thought she'd go as far as kicking me out of the house. I had lived with my dad and her since I was a kid, and after his passing, it felt like things were finally going to settle down. At least that's what I thought. But no, she had other plans. It started with small comments about me needing to find my own place. She said I couldn't just stay there forever, that I needed to learn to be independent. At first, I brushed it off. I was grieving, and I told myself she was just trying to get through the situation too. But then, one morning, she told me, clear as day, that I had to leave. She claimed that I was no longer welcome in her home. The shock was indescribable. Wasn't I family? Didn't I have a place in the house that my dad had worked so hard for? This was my home too. At least it had always been. But her words shattered any sense of security I thought I had. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to lash out and ask how she could do this to me after everything we'd been through. But there was something else inside me. Something that told me not to fight back immediately. I had to stay calm. I had to find a way to deal with this properly. That's when it hit me. She had no idea what I knew. She didn't know that the house was actually mine. It wasn't something I had told anyone, not even my dad. He had kept it a secret, probably out of concern for how it might affect the family. But I knew. I had always known, ever since I found the papers when I was 16, and that's when everything shifted. The house she was so eager to take full control over, I owned it. The discovery stopped me in my tracks. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of power return to me. She thought she had the upper hand, but I had the last card to play. The game had changed, and I was about to flip the entire table. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions: grief, anger, disbelief. But I didn't just want to react emotionally. I wanted to take control of the situation in a way that would ensure she would never forget the mistake she made. I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she had tried to take from me. Growing up, I never had the perfect family. My mom left when I was just a baby, and my dad was always working long hours. He was a good man, though, and did his best. We didn't have much, but we made it work. He was my rock, my protector, and to me, there was no one better. But when he met her, my stepmom, things began to shift. At first, I didn't mind. I was a little skeptical, like any kid would be when their parent starts dating someone new. But as time went on, she seemed okay. She wasn't overtly mean, but I could tell she wasn't exactly thrilled about me being there. She'd give me these looks that said everything, even when she smiled. She never fully embraced me like a mother should. It was more like I was just another part of the house, someone to tolerate. There were moments when she would try too hard to act mom-like, but it never felt genuine. I think deep down, she resented that my dad was mine first, that he loved me more than anyone else, including her. And I couldn't blame her. He was a good man after all, but the tension was always there, lurking under the surface. Over the years, things didn't improve. My dad never saw it, or maybe he just didn't want to. He would always make excuses for her, saying things like, "She's just not used to the family dynamic," or "Give her time, she'll come around." But I wasn't stupid. I could feel the underlying bitterness every time she looked at me, every time I did something she didn't approve of. There were more obvious signs, too. She would always find a way to favor her own kids, my half-siblings, over me. It wasn't always overt, but it was there. The way she would cater to their needs while I was often left to fend for myself. I had to figure things out on my own, be it with school projects or just life in general. She didn't care to know what was going on in my life, but she was always in the middle of theirs. One thing I did notice, though, was her obsession with the house. She'd walk around inspecting everything, especially after my dad would fix something or make an improvement. It wasn't just admiration. It was more like she was sizing it up, like she was claiming it. I never said anything to my dad, but I noticed how she would always talk about how the house was our home, how it was ours to build. I guess that should have been a red flag, but I thought nothing of it at the time. Then came the moment when my dad got sick. It wasn't anything major at first, just some health problems that were manageable. But over time, it became clear that his condition was worse than he let on. He wasn't the invincible man I'd always known. I saw it happening, watched as he grew weaker, slower. Yet, he still made time for his family. He always made time for us, despite everything. When I was 16, I found something that would change everything: the house papers. I was digging around for something in my dad's office and came across a folder tucked away in the back of his desk drawer. It wasn't labeled or anything, just a plain manila folder, but there was something about it that caught my attention. Inside were documents that made my heart drop into my stomach. It turned out that my dad had made sure the house was in my name, not just part of it, but the entire property. Every inch of the land, the mortgage, the deed, everything. I wasn't sure why he'd kept it a secret, but I never asked. I figured there was a reason he hadn't shared it with anyone, and I wasn't about to violate that trust by telling anyone, not even my dad's wife. I simply tucked the papers back into the drawer, making sure no one ever knew I had seen them. Looking back, I don't think my dad ever intended for her to have control over the house. I think he had his reasons for keeping it secret. Maybe he suspected what would happen after his death. Maybe he just didn't want to stir up trouble. Whatever the case, he made sure that I would be the one to take care of things if something happened to him. And that's when everything came full circle. My dad was gone, and she thought she could take everything for herself. She had no idea what I knew, no idea that I held the power in my hands. But even as she kicked me out, a part of me stayed calm, because I had learned something crucial, something that would turn everything in my favor. The days after my dad's funeral were like a blur of numbness and frustration. I was still in shock, my emotions raw, but the one thing that kept me grounded was the knowledge of what I now held, something she had no idea about. The house, everything my dad had worked for, was mine. And yet, she thought she could toss me out like I was nothing. That was a mistake. A huge one. I tried to keep my head down at first, not wanting to escalate things while I figured out my next move. I didn't want to let her know I knew the truth, at least not yet. She was so confident, acting like everything was hers now. She started making all these changes around the house, selling some furniture, redecorating, even hiring a cleaning crew to freshen things up. It felt like she was erasing my dad's memory, and with it, my place in the home we'd shared. One day, while I was still staying there, I overheard a conversation between her and one of her friends. I had been in the kitchen making some tea when I heard her voice, loud and clear. "It's all mine now, and I'm not going to let him take anything from me," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. "That house is everything. I'll make sure everything stays exactly as it is." I froze. She was talking about the house. Her words were full of such arrogance, like she had won some game. She had no clue I was right upstairs, hearing every word. Her casual dismissal of my place in the house stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I quietly slipped back into my room and started to think. Think about how I could turn this whole situation around. She thought she had me cornered, but what she didn't realize was that I had all the leverage. I began looking into things, gathering information. I went through the legal paperwork again, reading through the documents my dad had left behind. I had never truly understood everything back when I was younger, but now it made sense. There were clauses, Details about the house being passed on to me if anything happened to him. It was all there, clear as day. I also started to pay more attention to how she was acting. It wasn't just the house she was after, she was taking control of everything. Her conversations with my dad's lawyer became more frequent. She was making decisions on his behalf, even though I was supposed to be the executor of his estate. It didn't sit right with me. I knew that I needed to act quickly, before she got too far. But I couldn't let her know that I was aware of her moves. She had no idea what was coming, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room scrolling through some papers, I saw her on the phone again. She was pacing back and forth, whispering to someone on the other end. I caught snippets of the conversation. She was talking about selling off some assets, reallocating resources, and changing things around to make it more manageable. She was trying to lay claim to everything, and I knew it. But the most interesting thing she said was, "Once everything's in my name, it'll be easier to move forward." That was my cue. I knew she was planning something underhanded, and I had to be ready. She didn't know I had already started setting things in motion. I began documenting everything. I made sure I had proof of her actions, especially her attempts to take over my dad's estate. I called the lawyer without her knowledge, just to confirm that everything was in order, and started to put together a strategy that would knock her off her high horse. The more I watched her, the more I realized how easy it would be to turn this entire situation around. She was so focused on trying to claim what wasn't hers, that she didn't see me quietly gathering the tools to expose her. I even started to meet with the lawyer in secret. I had to make sure everything was legally sound before I made my move. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to dismantle everything she had worked for in the most satisfying way. But the biggest mistake she made? She never once suspected that I was watching her every move. Her arrogance was her downfall, and I was going to use it to my advantage. As the days went on, I found myself growing more confident. I could feel the power shift from her to me, and it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about my dad, the life he had built, and the future she thought she could take from me. I wasn't going to let her win. Not after everything. The day came sooner than I expected. I had everything in place, the legal documents ready, and I had gathered enough evidence to expose her for what she truly was. A greedy, manipulative woman who thought she could waltz in and take everything that wasn't hers. It was time to confront her, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry or desperate. No, I was going to play this cool, let her believe she was still in control, until the moment I ripped the rug out from under her. I remember the evening perfectly. She was in the living room, as usual, sitting with her friend, planning the next steps for their future in the house. I overheard her talking about hiring movers and trying to figure out how to deal with the extra space. It was nauseating, knowing what she was planning. But that evening, I called the lawyer one last time, just to make sure everything was in order. The plan was simple. At the right moment, I would walk into that living room, papers in hand, and put an end to this once and for all. As I entered the room, both of them looked up, startled by my sudden presence. The smug smile on my stepmom's face faded instantly when she saw the folder I was holding in my hand. Her friend, however, looked confused, wondering what was going on. But I didn't care. This wasn't about her. It was about her, my stepmom, and the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. "Is something wrong?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see the nervous twitch in her eyes. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I stood tall, walked into the center of the room, and slammed the folder on the table between us. Her eyes flickered from the folder to me, a look of confusion turning into annoyance. "You thought this was your house, didn't you?" I asked, my voice calm but cutting. "You thought you could throw me out without a second thought, but you didn't know that the house isn't yours. It's mine." For a moment, there was complete silence. Her mouth opened and closed as if she couldn't find the words. I could feel the power shift. The air was thick with tension. "What are you talking about?" She finally managed to stammer, her voice faltering. "I'm talking about these," I said, pulling out the deed to the house. The house that was left to me. The house that you tried to claim as your own. The house you've been selling off pieces of, trying to erase every trace of my dad. The house that's legally mine. I watched as her face drained of color. I could see the realization dawning on her. She had been caught, exposed in front of me and her friend. Her entire world was crashing down, and I could feel the satisfaction in every muscle in my body. "You're lying," she finally spat, recovering a bit of her composure. "This is all nonsense." "Is it?" I asked, my tone sharper now. "You think I don't have the legal right to be here? That I'm just some kid who has no say in what happens? You've been making decisions behind my back, thinking I wouldn't notice, but I've been watching you. Every move, every phone call, every time you tried to sell off a part of my dad's legacy. But now you'll answer for all of it." I handed her the papers, watching her hands tremble as she took them. She scanned through the documents, her expression changing from disbelief to horror. The realization had hit her like a freight train. She had no legal claim, no control over the house. It wasn't hers to take. You can't do this," she yelled, standing up now, her voice desperate. "I've worked so hard. This was supposed to be my life." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locking with hers. "No, you haven't worked hard. You've worked selfishly. You've taken everything my dad built, and now it's time for you to pay the price." Her face twisted with anger and frustration as she tried to regain control, but it was too late. There was nothing she could do. The truth was out, and her plan had unraveled completely. "Pack your things," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it before. "I want you out of this house. Now." She stared at me for a long moment, her face red with rage and humiliation. I could see her breaking inside, realizing she had no way out. She had nothing left. Everything she had tried to take from me was slipping through her fingers. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. But the moment passed, and I watched as she finally stumbled out of the room, her head hanging low. I could hear her muffled sobs as she packed her bags, trying to salvage whatever dignity she had left. I sat there for a moment, absorbing everything that had just happened. The feeling of power, the satisfaction of finally taking control, was overwhelming. She had thought she could push me around, but in the end, she had lost everything. The next few days were a blur of quiet satisfaction and emotional closure. I watched her pack her things, her face a mask of frustration and disbelief, and part of me couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when I took back control of my life, of my dad's legacy. I didn't need to say much more to her. The look in her eyes as she left the house was enough. She knew she'd lost, and I knew I'd won. She didn't try to come back. Not at first, anyway. After that night, the house felt different. It felt like mine again. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways, and for the first time since my dad had passed, I felt at peace. This was my home, the place where my dad had raised me, the place where we had shared countless memories, and now I had the power to preserve those memories without her trying to tear them apart. As for her, I heard through the grapevine that she had nowhere to go. She moved in with a friend for a while, but I couldn't help but wonder how long that would last. People like her always burn bridges eventually. She had no real friends, no family of her own to turn to. The way she treated people, the way she tried to manipulate everyone around her, it had all caught up to her. Word spread fast, and soon enough, she was labeled as the woman who tried to take everything from a grieving daughter. Her attempts to come back and reclaim what she thought was hers were futile. She called me a few times, begging for a chance to talk, but I ignored every call. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. She had shown me who she really was, and that person didn't deserve any more of my time or energy. One last time she showed up at the house unannounced. She stood on the doorstep, looking broken, but still somehow trying to maintain a shred of pride. She asked if we could talk, if we could work things out. I looked at her for a moment, and then I said the one thing that ended it all. "There's nothing to talk about. You had your chance." I closed the door, leaving her standing there in the cold. That was the last time I saw her. It felt final, like the last chapter had been written, and I was the one holding the pen. In the weeks that followed, I focused on what truly mattered, my future. I began to take the steps to properly settle my dad's estate, with the help of the lawyer who had been on my side from the beginning. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about my own independence and making sure that my dad's hard work wasn't in vain. I knew that my dad would have been proud of how I handled everything. As for the house, I made it mine. I kept the things that mattered, the items that had been my dad's, and slowly started to make the space my own. It became a symbol of strength, of resilience. Every room felt like a piece of my dad's memory, but it also became a testament to my own ability to take control. I didn't need anyone's approval, and I didn't need her approval. What mattered now was that I had the power to decide what happened next. Months passed, and the situation with my stepmom became little more than a distant memory. I didn't think about her much, and I certainly didn't regret my decision. She had shown her true colors, and I had done what I needed to do. But I did take some satisfaction in knowing that she had to live with the consequences of her actions. As for me, I moved forward. I went back to school, focused on building my career, and most importantly, started to truly heal from the loss of my dad. It was my life now, my choices, my power, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again.